Welcome to the origins and cultural roots of Mazar-I-Sharif. Hello, and welcome back. Over the last several episodes, we've explored strains that were supposed to represent opposites, daytime versus nighttime, uplifting versus sedating, only to find their chemistry and effects overlapped more than the marketing suggested. At this point, we've uncovered a clear pattern, so now we turn the page to go deeper into the roots of what it actually means to be an indica. Not the shorthand, not the stereotype, but the plant in its truest, oldest form. That story begins in northern Afghanistan, in the ancient city of Mazar-I-Sharif, where cannabis cultivation has never been about categories, but about resin. For centuries, farmers in Balkh province selected plants not because they looked flashy or tested high on THC, but because they could survive the climate, blistering summers, cool nights, and a short growing season. What emerged were short, broad-leafed plants designed by both nature and human hands to finish quickly and produce enormous amounts of sticky trichomes. These weren't grown to be smoked as flour. They were grown for hashish, sieved, rubbed, and pressed into pliable bricks that carried the reputation of Afghan hash across trade routes into Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. In this cultural context, Mazar was more than a crop. Its resin functioned as currency, ritual, and identity. Stamped bricks of hash marked the village they came from. Resin was smoked in prayer, shared in social circles, traded across borders. Where the West would later fixate on indica as a sleepy high, Afghan communities treated it as an anchor, a plant that provided livelihood and stability woven into both daily life and spiritual practice. When Western travelers arrived in the 1960s and 70s, they weren't discovering Afghan cannabis. They were witnessing a lineage that had already been perfected over centuries. Seeds from Mazar-I-Sharif were carried back to Europe and the US, and they became the foundation of countless modern hybrids, from Northern Lights to Skunk Hash 1 to the endless Kush lines on dispensary shelves today. The irony is that the strain that defined indica for the world is barely recognized by name today. And yet, without it, our vocabulary and our cannabis genetics would look completely different. Now, into the lineage and chemistry of Mazar-I-Sharif. Mazar-I-Sharif is a landrace cultivar, a pure Afghan strain stabilized by centuries of selective breeding in place, not the product of modern crossbreeding. That purity is what makes it the archetype of indica. The lineage stayed tight because survival demanded it. Only plants that could thrive in the Balkh climate were carried forward. Those seeds, saved year after year, refined into a chemotype with remarkable consistency, resinous, compact plants with a heavy but layered effect profile. Cannabinoid analysis of Afghan landraces, like Mazar, typically shows THC in the 18 to 22% range with very little CBD, but THC alone doesn't explain its effects. The terpene spread is what defines Mazar. Myrcene anchors the profile, often reaching 0.5–1.0% by weight. Myrcene synergizes with THC, enhancing its onset and deepening the body effects. That synergy is why Afghan cultivars feel so much heavier than THC isolates. It's not just potency, it's partnership. Supporting myrcene are caryophyllene and humulene, two terpenes that give Mazar its earthy, peppery aroma while contributing to its physiological footprint. Caryophyllene is unique in that it binds directly to CB2 receptors, acting more like a cannabinoid than a terpene. That interaction grounds the experience in the body, reinforcing Mazar's reputation as deeply physical. Humulene adds a subtle, dry, woody note and plays a role in appetite modulation, a layer often overlooked but culturally relevant in the ways Afghan hash was consumed. Limonene appears in smaller amounts, providing faint citrus brightness that keeps the profile from becoming one-dimensional. What's critical here is the entourage effect. Mazar doesn't hit as a flat downer. Instead, the combination of THC with this terpene ensemble creates a complex effect: muscle relaxation, anchored presence, and mental stillness without necessarily inducing groggy fog. Traditional hash consumers described it as centering, a resin that encouraged presence in ritual or social settings. That's not the language of couch lock. That's the language of balance within heaviness. And beyond the lab values, Mazar's chemistry shaped the modern cannabis gene pool. Seeds carried westward informed the development of Northern Lights, skunk, and nearly every Kush line that followed. When you smoke a hybrid today labeled as an indica, chances are you're tasting echoes of Mazar's terpene backbone, whether you realize it or not. So, what does it actually feel like to experience Mazar-I-Sharif? The answer reveals how far Western shorthand has strayed from truth. The high is undeniably heavy, a deep physical relaxation that drops tension out of the body and quiets racing thoughts. But it's not erasure. It doesn't dissolve you into sleep unless taken in high doses. Instead, it creates a sense of anchoring, an embodied pause where stillness is possible. Consumers of traditional Mazar hash often described it as enhancing presence, whether in conversation, reflection, or prayer. But when those same genetics reached the West, the narrative changed. Anything with Afghan DNA was lumped under the word indica and sold as nighttime, sleep aid, or couch lock. The complexity of Mazar's effects, physical yet present, grounding yet clear, was flattened into a bedtime cliché. The problem wasn't the plant, it was the marketing language. Bud tenders under compliance rules couldn't talk about cultural use or nuanced chemistry, so they leaned on shorthand descriptors. Over time, indica = sleepy became the industry's stock phrase. Psychology plays a role here. Expectation shapes experience. When consumers are told that indicas will make them drowsy, they often approach them that way, and the placebo effect does the rest. The same terpene profile that Afghan communities used for centering rituals gets reframed in the U.S. as a sleep aid. That's not education. That's stereotype reinforced by repetition. From a chemistry standpoint, the mischaracterization ignores context. Myrcene can enhance sedation, yes, but paired with caryophyllene and limonene, the experience becomes more layered. Dose, method, and individual tolerance all shift the outcome. Afghan farmers never described cannabis this way because they didn't think in terms of binaries. Their measure was resin quality, aroma, pliability of hash, all indicators of complexity. The West's habit of slicing cannabis into up and down categories erased that nuance. Mazar's true experience exposes the flaw. It cannot be pinned into a single lane. It's heavy but clear, physical but not incapacitating. To label it simply sedating is to miss its cultural and chemical reality. Mazar-I-Sharif stands as the proof that the indica-sativa binary is broken, not because it's confusing, but because it was never real to begin with. Indica wasn't born as a category for sleep. It was born as a lineage of plants adapted to northern Afghanistan's climate, stabilized for resin, and cherished as hashish. That history was flattened into a marketing term, leaving consumers with labels that obscure rather than educate. The chemistry of Mazar shows why the binary doesn't work. Yes, it leans body-heavy thanks to THC and myrcene, but its effects are layered, not singular. Caryophyllene and humulene contribute grounding without sedation. Limonene adds brightness. Dose and context determine whether the experience feels centering or drowsy. These are measurable realities, not myths. The way forward is terpene literacy. Bud tenders and consumers alike need language that points to the compound's driving effects, not blanket categories. Imagine menus that list the top 3 terpenes and cannabinoid ranges for each cultivar. Imagine conversations where a bud tender can say, "This one's myrcene dominant with caryophyllene support. Expect a body anchor with some mental clarity. Instead of that's an indica, it'll put you to sleep." That's the difference between compliance education and stereotype marketing. For consumers, this knowledge is empowerment. It shifts choice away from labels and toward chemistry. It builds understanding that cannabis is not a binary, but a spectrum shaped by genetics, environment, and human hands. And it restores respect to cultivars like Mazar-I-Sharif, which deserve to be remembered as cultural cornerstones, not reduced to cliches. The lesson is clear. The next time you hear the word indica, don't think sleepy. Think of Mazar-I-Sharif. Think of resin bricks carried along the Silk Road. Think of a plant adapted perfectly to its environment, stabilized by centuries of care, and misrepresented by decades of marketing. That is the reality. And that is why terpene literacy must replace the broken binary if cannabis culture is to move forward. This content is for educational purposes only. Nothing here is intended as medical advice. Always follow your local laws and regulations when purchasing or consuming cannabis.